Welcome to this video on Obergefell v. Hodges, presented by the World Affairs Council of Austin Mock Trials. Obergefell v. Hodges originated in 2013 as a federal civil rights action in the U.S. District Court for the Southern District of Ohio. The case challenged Ohio's refusal to recognize same-sex marriages from other states. The suit was filed by James Obergefell after Ohio refused to list him as a surviving spouse on his terminally ill husband John Arthur's death certificate. The core question at the district court level was whether Ohio's refusal to recognize lawful out-of-state same-sex marriages violated the 14th Amendment's due process and equal protection clauses. Ohio had constitutional amendments banning the recognition of same-sex marriages. Obergefell and Arthur, legally married in Maryland, sought emergency relief so Arthur's death certificate would reflect their marriage before Arthur's passing. This issue affected multiple legally married same-sex couples in Ohio. The district court initially granted a temporary restraining order for the death certificate and later ruled for Obergefell, striking down Ohio's non-recognition laws. However, the Sixth Circuit reversed this decision, upholding the state bans. This procedural conflict led the case to the U.S. Supreme Court. The plaintiff's theory argued that Ohio's refusal violated the Due Process Clause by denying the fundamental right to marriage and violated equal protection by treating same-sex couples differently. They contended that marriage recognition is essential to personal autonomy and family integrity. The plaintiffs argued that the right to marry is a fundamental liberty protected by the Due Process Clause, and denial of this right inflicts profound dignitary harm and creates a discriminatory second-class status. The defendant, Ohio, argued that defining marriage is a core state power reserved by the 10th Amendment, citing democratic processes. They asserted their definition was rationally related to promoting responsible procreation. The state of Ohio's theory emphasized that states have the authority to define and regulate marriage, and they were not required to recognize marriages contrary to their public policy. They argued the issue should be resolved democratically, not judicially. The Supreme Court's Obergefell v. Hodges decision ultimately affirmed marriage equality based on the 14th Amendment. Mock trials, like those run by the World Affairs Council, provide essential legal experience and foster civil discourse. This section covers the key arguments and witnesses presented during the trial level of Obergefell v. Hodges, a landmark case for love and equality. Dr. Evelyn Harper, a clinical psychologist, provided expert testimony. Her core argument was that sexual orientation is an immutable, ingrained characteristic. This testimony strategically undermined the state's view that same-sex marriage was merely a policy choice rather than a civil right. Dr. Harper's testimony, supported by a meta-analysis, established the biological basis of sexual orientation. She concluded that denying the right to marry imposes a state-crafted stigma and dignitary harm. Pat Winkle, a key fact witness, humanized the concrete harms of the marriage ban. She testified about her life with her same-sex spouse, illustrating the practical and dignitary losses incurred by Ohio's refusal to recognize their relationship. Petitioners called Attorney General Miller, who defended Ohio's ban, to testify. He admitted that the ban was politically motivated and intended to preserve a historic definition, reinforcing the argument that the ban lacked a rational basis. The arguments against the state bans highlighted violations of due process and equal protection. Plaintiffs stressed that the denial of marriage is contrary to personal autonomy and that state justifications lacked a rational basis for discrimination. Constitutional historian Dr. Amelia Torres traced the evolution of marriage from a property contract to a personal covenant. She argued that the Constitution is a living document that expands personal liberty, encompassing new relationships. James Obergefell, the lead plaintiff, sought recognition for his lawful Maryland marriage. The suit started over a death certificate designation, as Obergefell fought for the legal dignity of his marriage. The legal action by James Obergefell, whose husband was terminally ill with ALS, challenged Ohio's refusal to recognize same-sex marriages performed elsewhere. He fought for his marriage to be listed on a death certificate. This image highlights the defense's side of the case, representing the arguments and witnesses put forward by the state of Ohio, led by Hodges. Justice Miller served as a defense witness, arguing that states define marriage through democratic legitimacy. His testimony reinforced state sovereignty under the 10th Amendment and warned of judicial overreach into legislative functions. Justice Miller's defense focused on state democratic legitimacy, asserting that states have the reserved power to define marriage. He argued that the 10th Amendment supports state marriage definitions. The state's primary defense witness, Justice Miller, maintained that the power to define marriage belongs to the states. His testimony emphasized state sovereignty and warned against excessive judicial intervention in this matter. Reverend Parker, a defense witness, reinforced arguments related to the Free Exercise Clause. He expressed concern that recognizing same-sex marriage could compel religious institutions, citing religious conviction as a basis for opposing the definition change. Laura Hart, a state policy analyst, provided testimony outlining the strong legislative history and voter support for the marriage bans. She argued that overturning the bans would undermine the democratic process. The Obergefell case was part of a wave of district court rulings that found state bans on same-sex marriage violated the Constitution, setting the stage for the appellate process. The Sixth Circuit reversed several key lower court decisions, upholding the state bans. Their ruling conflicted with several other circuits, highlighting the constitutional arguments surrounding the 14th Amendment. Supreme Court oral arguments focused heavily on the 14th Amendment. Justices analyzed previous precedents concerning the history of marriage laws, centered on the issues of due process and equal protection. The 14th Amendment guarantees due process and equal protection. Historically, marriage has been considered a fundamental right, and the Supreme Court affirmed it as a civil right protected by the Constitution for all citizens. Justice Kennedy wrote the majority opinion, affirming the fundamental right to marry for all. The ruling struck down state bans on same-sex marriage based on both equal protection and due process arguments. The dissenting opinions argued that the issue belongs to the states, criticizing the majority's interpretation and judicial activism. Key disagreements centered on the proper definition of the right to marry. The 14th Amendment was central to the ruling, with the Due Process Clause affirming fundamental rights and the Equal Protection Clause ensuring equal treatment. Obergefell v. Hodges definitively protected marriage equality nationwide. Legal debate often centers on originalism, which focuses on the framers' understanding and the original public meaning of the Constitution. This perspective influences how justices interpret constitutional text. The Obergefell decision secures fundamental American rights, establishing marriage equality as the law of the United States. This historic ruling will be cited in future cases affecting related civil rights issues. The Obergefell decision serves as vital precedent in civil rights litigation today. It continues to shape legal interpretation, influencing future cases across various related civil rights issues.